What's cool about motorsport history is that you can go back through time and go, oh yeah, that happened, didn't it? And in some cases you can attach, it's a shame it ended. I think the operative term here is nostalgia, and it's a very powerful drug. V10 era Formula 1 is notorious for it, and there's also the British Touring Car Super Touring era where you supported a model based off what your dad drove. Then there's Group B, where cars were the specific model in name only and then had a warp drive stuck in the back and then got lobbed around the icy roads of Monte Carlo with 3 to 5 business days of turbo lag. But keeping things within the 1980s, there was also Group C. And I think Group C is why hypercar and LMDH have been as popular as they have been since they were introduced. The LMH and LMDH categories have led to an interest in endurance racing not seen since the 80s and that fabled Group C era. And with so many manufacturers involved, it's like that Group C era all over again. Sure, there's the BOP debate and how at the minute it's one make winning on either side of the Atlantic, but look at all those brands! And the brand that kind of owned Group C was Porsche. The 956 they brought into the early days of the Group C era was so dominant that privateer teams had to splash out on one just to be competitive. And it also locked out 9 of the top 10 positions at Le Mans in 1983. The car is iconic now, but if it was to happen today, it would be considered boring as anything. In 1983, 9 of the top 10 positions at Le Mans were filled by a 956 of some description. The famous Nobody's Perfect poster from the time, with the only non-956 being one of Peter Sauber's entries. That's dominance of an unprecedented scale. I don't think it had been done before, and I don't think it's been done since, although Porsche did try to revive that poster earlier this season. It just didn't have the same effect. The original is still the best because of what that achievement was, and not because of nostalgia. It was brought in for the 1982 season and won Le Mans in its debut year. In 1983, those who could, such as Jost, Obermeier, John Fitzpatrick, Richard Lloyd, Kremer and Brun, all bought a 956 and ran them to varying levels of success. And on occasion, the factory Porsches could be beaten by the privateer entries, which is what you love to see. But by 1985, rule changes were afoot. Porsche wanted to do what they're doing now, which is race in both the WEC, then called the World Sports Car Championship, and IMSA. But the rules meant that their iconic car had to be changed. But that wasn't necessarily the end for the 956, because some old friends of mine have managed to preserve the car in quite a unique way. This video is brought to you by REC Watches, a Danish watch company that does things a little differently. REC has built a reputation for creating timepieces infused with the DNA of historical machines. Machines like Ayrton Senna's Lotus 98T, an SR71 Blackbird, and the iconic Ford GT40. Now though, REC has taken things to a new level and created a run of limited edition watches built using parts of Porsche's 956. The all-conquering, all-dominant Group C prototype that helped birth the iconic Nobody's Perfect ad campaign of 1983. Each watch is made using parts of Porsche 956 chassis 106B, run by Richard Lloyd Racing, and was modified using an aluminium honeycomb crash structure. The parts used being parts that can no longer be used on the car due to age and wear, so no cars were harmed in the making of these timepieces. Various details include the 374 graphic to pay tribute to the 1986 Le Mans speed record, and the customised rotor replicating the gold BBS rims. The rubber strap design is, in addition, a nod to the Turbo Flat 6. Production is limited to 448 pieces for the Liqui Moly colourway and 508 for the Richard Lloyd colourway. More information can be found using the link in the description, and you can add to the pre-order discount that's currently on offer by using my 10% discount code, which is simply AIDAN. A-I-D-A-N. Not E-N, A-N. Thanks very much to REC for sponsoring today's video, and now we can see what came after this iconic machine. The intention for Porsche was, when the 956 was developed, be able to run in both the World Sports Car Championship and IMSA, the North American Endurance Series. But for the sake of simplicity here, any references to the World Sports Car Championship will just be called the WEC, because that's what it's called now. But the issue with this was they had to enter 2 different cars on either side of the Atlantic, because the category in use in IMSA, called GTP, was different to what was being used in the WEC, Group C. There was some overlap, but the differences between the 2 categories was too much for Porsche to send a car over. Group C's main regulation was that it was a very strict fuel consumption formula, which kind of goes against the myth that back in those days the cars went 100% all the time. Group C cars had to ration their fuel because they could only make a certain amount of pit stops over the course of the race, even at Le Mans, while in IMSA the emphasis on fuel consumption was less, so the teams could prioritise speed and downforce. Not only that, but the 956 was illegal in IMSA from the start because of how the construction of the cars was. In Group C and other FIA series, there was no regulation on how far back the driver's feet had to be. In IMSA, the driver's feet had to be behind the axle centreline, a regulation the FIA didn't introduce into the WEC until 1985 and Formula 1 until 1987. There were also regulations regarding the floors as well. GTP cars tended to have more aggressive designs, while the ground effect rules in the WEC were a little bit more regulated. So Porsche went back to the drawing board and tried to design a car that would continue the legacy that their already successful 956 had established. As you can probably guess, a lot of the 956's DNA made it into the 962. It was a bit longer since the WEC now needed the driver's feet behind the axle, otherwise the crumple zone would be the driver's ankles, and they upgraded the 2.65 turbo flat 6 to a 3 litre one instead, although they did do some other bits and pieces with the engine as well. The gains were decent enough, something in the region of about 15 horsepower, and a steel roll cage in the aluminium tubular frame was added because that was an IMSA requirement. One thing that was also going to add to the performance was something called PDK, and that is, well, I'm going to have to break out an old Top Gear joke for this. I don't speak a word of German beyond Rammstein songs, so I don't know how to say this, but it is DOPPEL. KUPPELUNG SG ETREIBE. Yeah, one of those German words where you combine loads of words into one Uber word. Doppelkupplungsgetriebe, or simply PDK because Germany, is essentially a dual clutch gearbox. Well, I say essentially, it is a dual clutch gearbox. This was initially put onto the 956 in the early 80s and was used for testing, but it really found its home in the 962, before ending up on the 997 road-going Porsche in around 2009. Hence, the Top Gear joke. Aber ja, natürlich Hans das ist steht unter einem Wasserfall. Barbara Barbara. Part of the IMSA rule set at that time was that the car had to have a production-derived engine, so Porsche took the 2.8 litre turbo flat 6 out of the 934 and modified it to conform to the IMSA rulebook. It should also be mentioned at this point that the engine now only had one turbo rather than two, because IMSA didn't let you use more than one. But when the car raced in the WEC, it had a varying array of engines. The PDK made the car 15 kilos heavier than normal, but it was worth it. In the middle of 1985, the engine was upgraded to a 3.2 litre turbo flat 6 that allowed the 962 to be more competitive against the Jags in IMSA. But that engine was banned in 1987. I don't know why, it was probably safety or something along those lines, I can't find a reference for it. Underneath, the car's diffuser was designed for maximum suck. Downforce on tap for days, and still as slippery in a straight line as the 956 was. One thing the IMSA rules allow is that you're allowed to put the exhaust in the diffuser as opposed to out the side, which was a WEC rule, so you could have a primitive blown diffuser on the car. And blown diffusers would start being seen in Formula 1 around the same time. I think Renault was the first to do it, with the blown diffuser being seen on Senna's upside down McLaren at Mexico in the early 90s, was it, when he got flipped over at Mexico? So yeah, this wasn't an Adrian Newey thing. Unlike the 956, those who could afford one bought one. The other good thing about the 956 and later the 962, what you bought wasn't necessarily what you had to run, because modifications to the 956 and 962 were very common. One of the main complaints about the car is that it wasn't stiff enough, although a lot of people said that it was quite easy to drive. Some teams would build a completely new chassis if they could, and then put the existing car back on top. Kremer Racing did the most notable modification, building a tub out of carbon fibre that replaced the aluminium one and then sold the new car, the CK6, to privateer teams, such as Brunn. Richard Lloyd Racing, who modified their 956 with a honeycomb crash structure, would develop the 962C GTI, which, once again, used the aluminium honeycomb crash structure and did away with the original sheet aluminium one, and they also completely redesigned the aero. It should be mentioned at this point that the 962C was the designation that Porsche originally gave to the car for the WEC, because it differentiated it from the specification of the one being used in IMSA. And the same thing was happening in the US as well. Some of these teams would be doing their own extensive modifications to the car, and at the end of it, they'd have a small business out of it. And isn't that the American dream? But the good thing for Porsche was, after a slow start in 1984 when the car still had some reliability problems, the 962 was carrying on where the 956 left off. It was fast and was winning things left, right and centre. The first race for the 962 was at the 1984 Daytona 24, with father and son team Mario and Michael Andretti driving the car, but it broke down after 127 laps when the gearbox went. And its first appearance at Le Mans later that same year, the car had ignition problems but was still able to be classified. For 1985 though, it would be in full time, replacing the 956 for the factory team, and some others. The 962 would be racing against its older brother, and it did two things. Firstly, it showed the improvements of the new car, but at the same time, it showed that the 956 wasn't exactly obsolete in terms of pace. But that led to tragedy at the 1985 Spa 1000 km, when Stefan Bellof in the older 956 was battling for the lead with Jackie Ickx, who had one of the newer 962s. Going down the hill towards Eau Rouge and Raidillon, Bellof tried to overtake up the inside of the left-hander at Eau Rouge and ended up clipping Ickx's car, sending them both off into the gravel. Both cars ended up in the tyre wall on the inside of the uphill left-hander, with Bellof's car catching fire. Ickx was able to get out under his own steam, probably owing to the safety improvements of the 962, but Bellof was sadly pronounced dead 10 minutes after reaching the circuit's medical centre. After this specific race, teams started retiring their 956s, buying the newer and safer 962 if they could. Because while the 956 had been an incredible servant for those teams and was still competitive, there were now safety concerns around it. Yost would continue to race the 956 until the end of 1986, winning the WEC finale, and then retired their cars for good. The car had been dominant all season in 1985. A 962 won at every round of that season, with the exceptions being the already mentioned race at Spa that was abandoned after Bellof's fatal crash, Fuji, and Le Mans. The Le Mans 24 Hour won by an older 956, funnily enough, because Porsche had miscalculated fuel for the final stints. Spa was won by Lancia, and Fuji by Hoshino Racing, who were running a March. The 962s seemed to sit perfectly in that Venn diagram of what an IMSA and WEC car needed to be, and it was the perfect balance of efficiency and reliability, which is what you want in an endurance racer. Because it was more fuel efficient, it could run longer, and because it was reliable, it had a higher chance of winning because other cars were going to break down. And in 1985 and 1986, it won the WEC and IMSA. The 956 had been dominant at Le Mans in 1983 and had also taken Bellof to that lap record at the Nürburgring, so this was one hell of a way of continuing that legacy. 1986 was a little less dominant for the 962s, but they were still pretty dominant. Brunn Motorsport would take the title, but coming up through the ranks was Jaguar, who would win at Silverstone, with a 956 winning at the Norrisring, Brands Hatch and Fuji, the last three wins for a 956, and then Sauber C8 would win at the Nürburgring. But while the 962 was winning, the emergence of Jaguar was going to begin to trouble them. But on the other side of the Atlantic, the 962 was still dominating. It had already won the championship in 85 and 86, and would win it two more times in 87 and 88. But in 1987, the dominance for Porsche began to fade. Jaguar utterly blitzed the competition that year, with the silk-cut TWR Jags winning every race except Le Mans, which was taken again by Porsche, and the Norrisring, which was won by a privateer 962, with the top 5 at the Norrisring all being 962s. So the car still had its moments. 1988 would be a similar story. Jaguar would take the top spot again, finishing every single race on the podium with only one at third place, which is incredible going, but the fight was with Sauber and Mercedes rather than Porsche. The Porsche factory team only did 2 rounds of the season that year and scored no wins, just 2 second places. Porsche was pretty much done at a factory level, but with the way that Group C and endurance racing was going in Europe at this point, you could say that they got out while they were ahead. Wins for the customer 962s were going to be few and far between on both sides of the Atlantic following 1987. Sauber won the WEC Championship in 88 with Yost in second with 1 single win, and in 1990 Sauber won again, winning all but 1 race, with Jaguar in second. But the Porsches were still soldiering on, with the chassis now 5 years old, with other manufacturers bringing new cars every single year. But by 1990 the Formula Oneization of endurance racing was beginning, and Group C would be done less than 18 months later. But in 1994 there was one last hurrah for the 962s, and it came as a result of exploiting quite the loophole. In 1994, the FIA and ACO were in a bit of a pickle over what to do with the regulations now that Group C was dead. A new category needed to be drummed up, but for the big race at Le Mans, Group C cars were allowed to come back with some rule tweaks. But the focus now was on GT style cars like the Ferrari F40 and McLaren F1, with minimum build requirements before you could get on the grid. But there was one small loophole. You didn't actually need to build these cars, you just had to sign a statement of intent, which means you don't actually need to build the 25 cars before the time Le Mans starts, you just have to pinky promise the FIA that you will at some point. And this is what the company Dauer did. They signed that statement of intent which allowed them to exploit the loophole to the max. Because in the aftermath of Group C the cars could turn up and race at Le Mans, but the thing was the focus was now on GT cars like already mentioned. So through some interpretation of the rules, what you could end up doing was getting the GT1 class, which was the new class for Le Mans, into a potential race winning position. A little bit easier than it would be to do it otherwise. By signing the statement of intent, Dauer was going to do something quite clever. They were going to take a Group C 962 and convert it into a road legal GT car. Jock and Dauer had bought several 962s with the intention of converting them into these road legal supercars. But with the loophole being there for the 1994 24 Hours of Le Mans, Porsche decided to assist with this project. And they not only helped to convert the cars, they also got them around Germany's insane regulations. The first prototype was shown off at the 1993 Frankfurt Motor Show, and then they worked on getting it ready for Le Mans. Because this thing was now technically a GT1 and not a Group C car, it was allowed a bigger fuel tank. And Porsche also went, hey, here's Hans Stuck, Danny Sullivan and Thierry Boutsen. They'll drive it for you. Oh, and here's Yannick Dalmas and Mauro Baldi while you're at it. While the other Group C cars were restricted to 12 laps per stint because they were still under Group C regulations, the Dauer 962s were doing 14 or 15 laps, losing way less time in the pits. Although there were still some reliability problems. If not for Eddie Irvine's Toyota encountering issues, they might not have won. That's right, through this loophole they ended up winning the 1994 Le Mans 24 Hours. It was the last ever win for a 962, about 10 years after it was first introduced. After this, the loopholes were closed and the regulations changed. The FIA messed around with several new rulebooks, and after throwing stuff at the wall for a bit, they managed to get something to stick, albeit briefly, with categories like GT1, LMP and other stuff. It was stuff that worked for a bit, but then the inevitable happened. The costs got too much, and the teams and manufacturers all pulled out. In the late 90s we had the Mercs doing backflips because nothing beats a Jet 2 holiday, and this later evolved towards LMP1. After LMP1 suffered a similar fate to GT1 with costs and withdrawals, we now have Hypercar. And Hypercar has kind of allowed Group C to come full circle. We've got so many manufacturers currently in Hypercar and also the LMDH category that's in IMSA, and the interest in the categories themselves hasn't been this high since Porsche was dominating in the 80s. And we've still got McLaren, Ford and Hyundai to come in the next couple of years. It's actually brilliant to see this much interest in a modern category of racing. The spirit of Group C truly lives on. So then a look at the Porsche 962, the successor to the already all-conquering 956. If this has been an interesting video for you, then do like the video so I know a good job was done, and for more stuff from the channel get subscribed and also get the Derek bell on so you never miss out on anything else. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads at Patreon who support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help with the picture purchasing piggy bank or anything else, there'll be a link to Patreon in the description along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and anything else that you might want or need to know. Or the super thanks for one and done donations and memberships so you can Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.